Hello. All right. So today for week seven's class, we're going to cover the John Milton part of um, Unit 5 for English 12A. John Milton is a little heavy. There's kind of a lot of stuff that you're getting asked to do for this. So we're just going to cover that one. And then our final week, when we get back from winter break, we're going to cover the last two sections on neoclassicism for Unit 5, and then you'll be all set. So, again, as always, please make sure that you have gone through the tutorial already. There's a lot of extra information, especially contextual stuff that's happening in here that'll really help you understand sort of like more about what's going on and just some of the things that you kind of need to know about John Milton. So stop, make sure you go through the tutorial before you dive in with me to these lesson activities. All right, so we're gonna kind of, let's take a step back here. We have a handful of works by John Milton that we're going to be looking at. I just want to see if there's any sort of list that we're going to be dealing with. No. Okay. Well, sort of. So we're going to talk about this one real fast. So this is on Shakespeare, just because this is kind of like an interesting thing to think about. And then you get asked a question in here, and so it's just kind of like interesting to talk about this, and you want to try and answer these things. Again, you need to know contextually what's going on. John Milton was an extremely religious man, and so somebody in his like religious level, he was a Puritan. To admire Shakespeare is sort of like a big thing, and so that's sort of like one of the things that you need to know. And then I'm going to read it, and then I'll talk about the other thing that it really brings up. So, what needs my Shakespeare for his honored bones, the labor of an age in piled stones, or that his hallowed reliquaries should be hid under a starry pointing pyramid? Dear son of memory, great heir of fame, what needest thou such weak witness of thy name? Thou in our wonder and astonishment hast built thyself a livelong monument. For whilst to the shame of slow endeavoring art, thy easy numbers flow, and that each heart hath from the leaves of thy unvalued book those Delphic lines with deep immersive took, then thou our fancy of itself bereaving, dost make us marble with too much conceiving, and so sepulchred in such pomp dost lie, that kings for such a tomb would wish to die. And so he's basically bringing up this idea that Shakespeare has been immortalized by his work, and he's saying that that's how you become immortal. And so one of the things I asked you here, what does he mean when he writes that kings would wish to die? So it's every king's desire to be remembered, and so to be remembered in this way, carved in the stone of history, because he's talking about using marble and stuff. That's the type of tomb that every king, it's a metaphor. So just a little bit on that one, and then if we go back, okay. So there's these couplet poems that go together, Allegro and Il Penseroso, and that, or Il Pensiero, sorry. And I'm going to put them up on the screen and then have a reading be playing in the background from a video of them, because it's just a lot. And so for the first one, you're going to be paying attention for the tone and the words used. So listen to it, read along with it. You might want to replay this part of the video to really answer the question. And then we will talk mostly about Paradise Lost after that. I am going to play both of these together. Cool. Okay. So let me get the works up real just there we go. Sorry, this wasn't scrolling.
L'Allegro by John Milton. Hence, loathed melancholy, of Cerberus and blackest midnight born, in Stygian cave forlorn, mongst horrid shapes and shrieks and sights unholy. Find out some uncouth cell where brooding darkness spreads his jealous wings, and the night raven sings there under ebon shades and low-browed rocks, as ragged as thy locks, in dark Cimmerian desert ever dwell. But come, thou goddess fair and free, in heaven yclept Euphrosyne, and by men heart-easing mirth, whom lovely Venus at a birth, with two sister graces more to ivy-crowned Bacchus bore, or whither, as some sages sing, the frolic wind that breathes the spring, Zephyr with Aurora playing, as he met her once a Maying, there on beds of violets blue, and fresh blown roses washed in dew, filled her with thee, a daughter fair, so buxom, blithe, and debonair. Haste thee, nymph, and bring with thee jest and youthful jollity, quips and cranks and wanton wiles, nods and becks and wreathed smiles, such as hang on Hebe's cheek, and love to live in dimple sleek, sport that wrinkled care derides, and laughter holding both his sides. Come and trip it as ye go, on the light fantastic toe, and in thy right hand lead with thee the mountain nymph, sweet Liberty. And if I give thee honour due, mirth, admit me of thy crew, to live with her and live with thee, in unreproved pleasures free, to hear the lark begin his flight, and singing startle the dull night, from his watchtower in the skies, till the dappled dawn doth rise. Then to come in spite of sorrow, and at my window bid good morrow, through the sweet briar, or the vine, or the twisted eglantine. While the cock with lively din scatters the rear of darkness thin, and to the stack or the barn door stoutly struts his dames before, oft listening how the hounds and horn cheerly rouse the slumbering morn, from the side of some hoar hill, through the high woods echoing shrill, sometime walking not unseen by hedgerow elms on hillocks green, right against the eastern gate, where the great sun begins his state, robed in flames and amber light, the clouds in thousand liveries dight. While the ploughman near at hand whistles o'er the furrowed land, and the milkmaid singing blithe, and the mower whets his scythe, and every shepherd tells his tale under the hawthorn in the dale. Straight mine eye hath caught new pleasures, whilst the landscape around it measures.
Okay, so since we're not actually going to study this for the purpose of the lesson activity, I'm not going to go through the whole thing. It's a particularly long poem. But the reason I wanted to play that is because these poems are companion poems. I wanted you to get this idea of the tone for this one. So ignore the tone of this man's voice when I say tone, but this is a bit of a cheerful a poem, and allegro in Latin means fast. It's about speed and quickness. It's also like lively when we think about allegro in music. And if you've ever played music or like looked at sheet music, sometimes you'll see allegro written on there, and it's Italian, Latin based, whatever, for lively. And so that's really the pace and the tone of this poem. We have like a story of these couple, Zephyr and Aurora, falling in love, and then they have a child together, and then it's just all about like having, you know, this beautiful, happy, pleasurable life. And that's really what, you know, is kind of going on there. And so I wanted to give you that contrast because we're looking at the words and sounds to create a quiet, somber tone in this other poem. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to play this one. However, And again, like we'll see if I feel like we've gotten through like an amount of it and it just feels like it's going on too long, I may stop it also. But I think this one's a little shorter. So, oh no, it's an 8-minute video. So yeah, that might happen again.
Il Penseroso by John Milton. Hence, vain, deluding joys, the brood of folly without father bred. How little you best dared, oh, fill the fixed mind with all your toys, dwell in some idle brain, and fancies fond with gaudy shapes possess, as thick and numberless as the gay motes that people the sunbeams, or likest hovering dreams, the fickle pensioners of Morpheus' train. But hail, thou goddess, sage and holy, hail, divinest melancholy, whose saintly visage is too bright to hit the sense of human sight, and therefore to our weaker view o'erlaid with black staid wisdom's hue. Black, but such as in esteem Prince Memnon's sister might beseem, or that starred Ethiop queen that strove to set her beauty's praise above the sea nymphs and their powers offended. Yet thou art higher far descended, thee bright head Vesta long of yore, to solitary Saturn bore his daughter she, in Saturn's reign, such mixture was not held a stain. Oft in glimmering bowers and glades he met her, and in secret shades of woody Ida's inmost grove, while yet there was no fear of Jove. Come, pensive nun, devout and pure, sober, steadfast, and demure, all in a robe of darkest grain, flowing with majestic train, and sable stole of cypress lawn over thy decent shoulders drawn. Come, but keep thy wonted state, and e'en steep.
Okay. Um, so we can just sort of even look at some of the words that we have in here. Right here in the first sentence, deluding. So this idea of deluded, that gives you this, okay, kind of like what's going on. Something's not quite right. The brood of folly. So folly is like mistakes. Um, it's just, dwell in some idle brain. There's gaudy shape, hail divinus melancholy. Like these are distinctly words that create like this tone that things aren't happy. We have black being repeated. The word weaker. There's just a lot of this idea of darkness. And then if you're looking over at like some of the footnotes, you get some more ideas. But yeah, he's creating, that's what this is, right? A story about melancholy's parentage. And so these are a lot of the things that you should be looking at in terms of what words and sounds. So hopefully you were able to see some of what was going on there.
Women.
Okay. Okay. So we're going to talk about Paradise Lost, which is this epic poem that explores the story of Adam and Eve, it just in a different way. And so we're going to be, I'm looking at that. So I'm looking at my stuff here. Okay, so how does Milton explore the theme of disobedience in his epic poem Paradise Lost? What are the consequences of such disobedience? And then you want to answer in a couple of paragraphs. So I have a few things to show you. The first one talks about women in the story, and it'll make sense. And then I'm just going to show you a couple of videos. Let's just go with that. And then I'll talk about some of the ideas, but remember we're thinking about the theme of disobedience and the consequences of disobedience for these.
Contemporary readers tend to find Milton's view of women problematic. His interpretation of the Bible on this subject is quite literal. Women are inferior to men and must submit to them. And yet, Adam chooses his companion Eve over obedience to God, offering a vision of companionship marriage that was progressive in Milton's day. Moreover, Milton's Eve isn't simply a sexual temptress. She's a complex being with a strong desire to acquire knowledge and be independent. Epic poetry. Paradise Lost radically reconceives the genre of epic poetry, casting Satan and his army in magnificent heroic guise and elevating a married couple to the status of epic heroes. Epic action is revolutionized as well, moving from martial exploits to moral battles, elevating the heavy burden of human free will. Stylistically, Milton rejects heroic couplets, tying the constraints of rhyme to the political censor of his day. John Milton invokes a heavenly muse.
Okay, so just this idea in general about like women and the way that women are perceived is important because of Eve throughout the story. So yeah, that I think is the only part of this I wanted to play now. Okay. And so the two books that we're supposed to have covered for this from this whole poem, and by books, it's not like books, but just the way that it's written, like sections, chapters, if you will, are books 1 and books 4. So we're going to look at those, and then like just to give you the summary, it'll give you some more information on that. We'll talk some more.
John Milton prefaces Book 1 of Paradise Lost to explain that he rejects the convention of heroic couplets to liberate his heroic poem from the troublesome bondage of rhyming. But then the opening lines of Book 1 tick off expected elements of epic. Milton states his major theme of man's first disobedience, invokes the muse to aid my adventurous song and justify the ways of God to men. And then Milton throws us into the midst of a tale already underway, the story of Satan's armed rebellion against the monarchy of God. The story begins in the wake of the rebels' defeat. They've been cast out into bottomless darkness and endless torture. Arch enemy Satan awakens on a fiery lake next to his first mate Beelzebub. In an exchange of rousing speeches, Satan and Beelzebub determine never to submit or yield. They plan to wage eternal war against the tyranny of heaven. Satan proclaims, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. He calls out to his legions, and Milton offers an epic catalog of fallen gods. Addressing his full army, Satan gives voice to a rumor that God plans to plant a new colony, and Satan calls a council to determine war tactics of fraud and guile. Vulcan builds a great gold capital called Pandemonium, all demons, and the great council begins.
Right.
Book 4 of Paradise Lost starts with Satan gazing toward Eden, overcome by doubt and despair and bitter memory of what he was. He thinks about his relationship with God and wonders if there's still space for repentance and pardon, but then he realizes that he'll never submit, and he resolves anew to hold with evil. In the guise of a bird, Satan flies into the tree of life to get a better view of the blissful, idyllic Garden of Eden. He sees Adam and Eve hand in hand, noble and godlike, and this mark of God's favor strengthens his resolve to tempt them and deliver them to woe. He leaves the tree and shapeshifts to get closer, overhearing their conversation. Adam reminds Eve that their only rule is not to eat from the tree of knowledge, for God hath pronounced it death to taste that tree. Eve agrees, reliving her first memories, how a voice directed her to Adam, saying, of him you are, his flesh, his bone. But first she's transfixed by her own reflection in a pool. Eve then remembers what Adam first told her. To give you being, I lent my side to you, nearest my heart, to have you by my side as dear solace. At this, their conversation turns to conjugal delight. Envious of their pure love, Satan resolves to seduce them with forbidden fruit. Meanwhile, Archangel Uriel suspects that that was no cherub, and he warns Archangel Gabriel that a fallen angel has entered paradise. He sends 2 strong angels to watch over Adam and Eve, and they find Satan at Eve's ear, tempting her dreams. They bring him unwilling to Gabriel. As Satan prepares to fight, God sends the sign of a pair of golden scales in the sky. Convinced that the scales indicate his pending defeat, Satan flees to hell. Milton again shows Satan as a somewhat sympathetic character, afflicted by...
I'm going to pause this here just because this comes up in one of the other questions, so it's not like super important for us to cover this right now. Okay, so let me just double check what this one is. Okay, here we go.
Obedience and disobedience. Milton styles Satan's disobedience to God as political rebellion, but not so the fall of Adam and Eve, seen much more as a domestic dispute. With both stories of fallen creatures, Milton suggests that the order of the world depends on obedience to God. Sin and innocence. Innocence for Adam and Eve is closely connected to their ignorance. When they lose their innocence, it's because they disobey God's instructions and bring sin into the world. Once they have sinned, they can never be innocent again. Fate and free will. If God has knowledge of everything that has happened and will ever happen, and also possesses the power to change anything, do his creatures really have free will? Milton tries to make the case that God is careful not to influence his creatures, but to leave their individual choices to them, even when he can see the outcome. He does this because he wants all his creatures to obey him out of love, not because they are forced to. It has been said of John Milton that no other major English poet has been so...
Okay, so let's go back and talk about this. So we have a couple of instances of disobedience that appear in here. So I made a few notes. Okay, so disobedience is explored by Adam choosing Eve over God. So when Satan tempts Eve with the fruit and she eats it, she then goes and tempts Adam with the fruit, and Adam disobeys God by eating the fruit. So that's one of the examples of disobedience. Eve's independence, so the fact that she goes off on her own and she chooses to listen to this disguised version of Satan rather than be obedient to God. That's another example. Satan's whole story arc here is disobedience to God. That's, he leaves, fights against heaven and all of that. Satan choosing to try to entice mankind to ruin this perfect Eden that God has created. And then Eve eating that fruit. Okay, and so those are ways that he explores the themes. If you talk about some of that kind of thing, you can definitely find a lot of information online. Just make sure, you're paraphrasing. Cite your sources. If you want to look deeper into that, if you need more beyond the summaries or beyond reading and what's in the tutorials here. And then what are the consequences of such disobedience? Well, when Satan and the other angels rebel against God, they are banished and they go down into hell and all of that. And then for humans, they are banished from Eden and forced to live in a less perfect world than he had originally designed. So there we go, part B. How does Satan justify his decision to entice them? Let's see.
Fruit from the tree of knowledge. The fruit symbolizes the seductive temptation to gain knowledge that only God should know. God forbids Adam and Eve from eating it, which makes them want it even more. Eating it causes both of them to fall from their innocent and ignorant state. The idyllic Garden of Eden symbolizes God's favor and his direct connection to Adam and Eve.
Okay, so
Once Adam and Eve disobeyed.
all right, I didn't do a very good job making a lot of notes on this in my lesson plan here, so my videos aren't helping me be as organized as they usually are. Okay, so Satan chooses to justify this decision. I actually have the quote that I would say to use in my business here. Let me get us to it. Okay, right here. This is really where you get some of the textual evidence. Let me, okay. So the question, how does Satan justify his decision to entice Adam and Eve to eat from the tree of knowledge? Support your answer with textual evidence. So he justifies his decision because he thinks it's unfair that God doesn't want them to be equal. The fact that he doesn't want them to have the knowledge is suspicious, right? And so that's how he's trying to do it. And then we have this footnote over on the side here. Satan is arguing that God has forbidden Adam and Eve to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil because he is envious of them. And so this is the example really here. One fatal tree there stands of knowledge called, forbidden them to taste. Knowledge forbidden? Suspicious, reasonless. Why should their Lord envy them that? Can it be sin to know? Can it be death? And do they only stand by ignorance? Is that their happy state the proof of their obedience and their faith? O fair foundation laid whereon to build their ruin. Hence I will excite their minds with more desire to know, and to reject envious commands, invented with design to keep them low, who knowledge might exalt equal with God's. Aspiring to be such, they taste and die. What likelier can ensue? So he's saying, again, why it's suspicious that God doesn't want them to have knowledge. Are they only allowed to be happy because they're ignorant? And then God must just be jealous because then they'd be equal to him if they had that knowledge. That's part C. Part D is one of your own thingies. You got to pick a couple of words. You have to pick 6 total words. Actually, 8 total words, and then write sentences. So 2 from On Shakespeare, 2 from the other poems, 2 from Paradise Lost. Part E, take a few lines from Paradise Lost that weren't explored in the lesson. So again, that is calling back to the tutorial. So whenever you go through tutorials and go over stuff, here we go. They're going to give you excerpts and things and talk about it. So it's saying, look at stuff that's not these excerpts that are already gone over. Good example might be the one that we just talked about. Okay. Rewrite them in more modern, straightforward language. I actually think that bit of textual evidence I showed you is a really good example of something that's pretty easy to modernize. If you just ignore the funky spellings, it makes sense. And then, okay, almost done here. And then, so we're going to examine the claim that Satan in Paradise Lost is not merely evil personified, but rather a misunderstood character. So I have a couple of bits here, actually. Yeah. I think we get a little bit here. Back up just a bit, and then I have another one for
you. Afflicted by envy and doubt. It's no coincidence that this is the first time the reader has access to Satan's internal thoughts, which conflict with his outward displays of confidence. Eve's love lyric to Adam introduces us to the gentle couple's loving and sexually active companionship. And here Milton upends convention by introducing a domestic couple as epic and heroic figures. Eve's initial vanity evokes Narcissus, and her indirect...
And then, this is where you're going to get the bulk of Satan.
Let's talk about some of the characters in John Milton's Paradise Lost. Known in heaven before his fall as the archangel Lucifer, Lightbringer, Satan is cast into hell after leading a massive rebellion against God. At times conflicted about his intentions to resist an all-powerful God, Satan ultimately realizes he's doomed to eternal suffering. He corrupts God's newly created race of humans. Even though Satan is the evil antagonist of the story, Milton styles him as an epic hero, gives him great lines, and makes him the poem's most complex character. God is the omniscient ruler of heaven and the universe. He sees and knows.
Okay, so I don't know why I do not make notes about this, because this is actually something I think is really interesting. So if you're thinking about the way, like the reasons and stuff that Satan gives, really helps if you like look over from book 4. If you can read anything else about book 4, which isn't really that long, and like I said, if you ignore kind of the funky spelling and like punctuation and stuff, it's not the language isn't too out of the realm of what you're experienced with. But basically he's just hurt. He's hurt, and that's sort of like what caused the rebellion anyway of the angels, right? Satan is hurt that God created man in his image and gave them this life and didn't expect servitude beyond just like worshiping God and obeying God, whereas angels are thought of as God's servants. And so that's really where he's trying to like bring in this concept of Satan being a sympathetic character. He's jealous, he's hurt, he's sad. And he's just kind of talking about like that, and that's what he's doing. And then also when in the video where we got the idea of them of where Satan is spying on Adam and Eve and they love each other and he's so jealous of their love, and you know that's just not something that he is going to get to experience. So also we have like with this idea here with the 44, it's this idea too that because these angels fell, humankind, specifically Adam and Eve in this sense, took the place of the angels in God's favor. So just a whole bunch of that kind of thing is going on there. And then it's just sort of, do you think that he is just evil, or do you think he's misunderstood because he feels betrayed and all of that? So that covers the John Milton tutorial. Hopefully you found this helpful.